So I just finished reading an open book, the autobiography of John Huston. I began reading it in April, and then I read pretty consistently for a while, and then I took a break for like 2 months. And now recently I've been pretty disciplined again, and now I finished it today on August 27th. It was a pretty big book, at least for my for my understanding. Almost 500 pages. It's been it's been decades since I read a book that long, and I'm really proud of myself. I rated the book 5 stars, so that tells you that I really, really loved it. I really liked, yeah, it just felt like when you read a book for that long, that's kind of long. It really feels like spending time in the company of that person, which I really liked. And Houston is certainly an interesting person to spend some time with. I wanted to read that book for a while. I've always been interested in learning about John Huston. He just always struck me as such an interesting character, and everything I'd ever heard about him, always you just always heard such wild stories about him, and so I just always was quite fascinated by those things I would hear. So I had it on my to read list for a while, but then I read Katharine Hepburn's book, where she wrote about her experiences making The African Queen. The book is called The Making of the African Queen, or how I Went to Africa with Bogart, Bacall, and Huston and Almost Lost My Mind, I think. It's a very slim volume, and it's just every time she talked about John Huston, whatever she said about him, it always made me laugh, and I just always thought he just sounds like such a likable guy, and like such an interesting character. And she talked about how he was always telling stories, and she, just the way she described him really made me like him. So while I was reading that book, I thought, once I'm finished with that book, I'm gonna read his autobiography, and which just so happened to be at my local library. So that's how I got the book. Well, one of the best things about this book is, when you read other biographies or autobiographies, usually you don't really expect to get great writing. You don't really, usually when you read things like that, it's always nice if somebody has a nice style, but you can't really expect that in books like that, I find. You can't really expect a literary work. It's more to get, it's kind of more to get information across, and to, for me, when I read books like that, I want to get that information. So that's the main, the main purpose of my reading books like that. But of course, John Huston was a great writer, so you're actually reading a great book. You are reading a literary work, so that makes it all the more interesting, and all the more appealing, and you get much more sucked into it, I feel. And it's clear that he's a great storyteller. And then, when he tells stories, things he's been through, you feel like so you sometimes get the feeling he might be adding a little bit, kind of like embellishing things to make them sound even more exciting or wild. And I'm not saying he made things up, like the things he said that they didn't happen or anything, but it just feels like he might just add a little bit of, add a few details, or make them somehow more, I don't know how to say it, but he certainly, when somebody's a great storyteller, they sometimes add a little bit to make it an intriguing story, and sometimes you feel that when you read his book. And like I said, I'm not saying that what he's saying is not true, not at all. I have no doubt that all these things happen. but you can tell there's a writer telling a story and kind of making it, kind of maybe tightening it or increasing a certain dramatic or comedic effect, is what I'm trying to say, I guess. Um, so what I learned, he basically he he mostly, he first talks about his family and his family background from both sides, and really begins with his grandparents, and you can tell that on both sides there are really really interesting people. And of course his father was the great actor Walter Huston, and you can just tell he comes from a family of originals, and then he talks about then he went to South America, and then he became like was interested in painting, and studied art, and met a lot of interesting artists, and went to Europe, and London and Paris, and whatnot. And then he kind of describes how he started making films, and talks a lot about work, but it's very even when he talks about his work, it's very very personal, and he never overshares, or he never goes into great details in terms of his work. And he writes also about the war a lot. That's a pretty big chapter when he was in the war, and he somehow finds a really good balance of he finds a really good way of writing about his work, writing about movies, making movies, and then at the same time writing about what's going on in his life at that time. But he never, what I liked about it was that he never got too personal. When he wrote, for example, about women, he would maybe say, how he met somebody and that they got married and blah blah blah, but he would never talk about their relationship, or the problems he had in certain relationships. Nothing of the kind. although he Although the whole book feels very personal and warm and direct, he never really, he doesn't write about his feelings, and that's something I really like. I really like when autobiographies are written in a way where, like, somebody primarily writes about their work or their passions or hobbies and stuff, but because they love what they do, and when they write about it, you get a feeling for who that person is. I don't really like reading autobiographies where people share their dirty secrets, and I don't like these tell-all books, which I think maybe women are more prone to writing than men. I don't know. But it's a very, although, like I said, it's personal. There's a personal feel to it. It's also kind of stoic, and that's kind of what I like. I don't like when people overshare their feelings. I don't like it. And like he seems to know exactly what he wants to share and what he doesn't want to share, and you can tell he protects a certain part of his life, although he does give you a lot in the book, which I don't know, I just really like that, how he chose to leave certain things out, and to keep certain things private. And the impression I got of the person after reading this book, the impression I have of John Huston after reading this book is, of course, a completely unique character, larger than life person, who's very, all those things they talk about, eccentric, and just a character, But beyond that, he comes across as very generous, and somebody with a big heart and great knowledge and great understanding. He was extremely well read, Like you can tell he knows a lot and has experienced a lot. Somebody with a he has a great combination of, because a lot of times people either have a lot of book knowledge or people have a lot of life experience, but you don't often find people who have both, who have, really great life experience and also have read a lot or have a lot of, knowledge. And he has that, and he comes across, it almost makes you a little envious, because he seems like he really comes across like a person who has led such a rich life. It seems to me that, he lived, 10 lives, in one life. It's like he experienced everything and tried out so many things, and it makes you almost envious because you really feel there's a person there who's really like, really seizing the day and really living. That's how he comes across, like somebody with great energy and great zest for life, but also goes out and does things and completely unafraid and very, very open and very non-judgmental is how he comes across, and very interested in, when he went to different parts of the world to shoot a movie, you can tell he had a great interest in the culture there and in the people there, and tried to somehow, include them in the making of the picture. And that's the impression I have of him. Generosity is generally kind of what came across. Like, it's not by any, it's not like he was trying to make himself look that way. It's just the way he sees the world. You can tell that he's very generous and very open-hearted. It's just a big heart, you can tell. And but somebody with great respect for women too. You can tell the way he talks about women. Just he also had, women friends that he respected and was friends with without, having any romance with them. That's always a good sign. That's something I also noticed. And I also liked the way he talked about people. When he talked about actors or people he worked with, you could sometimes tell. I mean, if he really liked somebody flat out, then he would flat out say it. I really loved this person or admired this person or somebody I really got along with well. But, and people he liked a little less, you could still, you could tell that he didn't really like them, but he wouldn't. With a very few exceptions, he would rarely say, this person was impossible or something like that. There's only one or two cases where he's like, clearly Montgomery Clift for somebody, for example, is somebody he just didn't get along with, and he made 2 movies with him, and the first one was The Misfits, and there it was fine, and then he made another one, Freud, the biography of Sigmund Freud, and he was impossible there, and there he also kind of wrote Monty was impossible, but even when he doesn't like, or George C. Scott, he also talks about that that he didn't like him. But even when he doesn't, even when you can tell he doesn't like somebody, or even when he comes out and says, he doesn't like somebody, he still always finds something positive to say about them, which you can, and that's what I mean when I say that you can tell, he was a generous person and a very fair person, that even he said something positive about everyone. But you can tell when he doesn't like somebody. But I just feel he was very respectful. There was not a single person in this book that he discussed where you're thinking, wow, that was disrespectful what he said about that person. Not a single time did that happen. So that's why I'm saying that he seems very fair. But it never seems like, when I'm saying he's trying to say something positive about people, it feels very organic. It doesn't feel like he's sitting there thinking, I have to write something positive about this person that I couldn't stand. It really feels very, that's how he really was. It really feels genuine that that's how he was. That even if he didn't like somebody, he had a certain distance and a certain maturity to look at people from a distance and kind of, you know, leaving your own ego behind and looking at a person without your own, you know, kind of like detached from your opinion about them. So that's what struck me. And my favorite chapter was when he wrote about his father, and just generally when he mentioned his father. Walter Huston is also one of my favorite actors, and you can just tell, you know, that these two had a really strong bond and a really strong connection, and just the way he writes about his father is so, you know, it was just so beautiful that, you know, he basically, once his father dies, he kind of devotes a few pages to his dad and kind of pays tribute to his father, and it's done in such a unsentimental but still, you know, he really pays tribute in such an unsentimental way, but there's still so much love and warmth there, and true feeling there, and it's just beautiful the way he writes about his dad, and he makes his father look like such a great guy without, you know, being hyperbolic or acting like he's the greatest guy who ever lived. It just feels very, yeah, very organic and natural, and just a really, those few pages were really my favorite part. I think that the way he wrote about his dad was just so beautiful. And just generally, I like the way he wrote about people he met. And, you know, this guy met so many people. It's so, like, that's another thing you kind of get envious of, you know. I mean, he met so many of these interesting characters, you know, from Tennessee Williams to Truman Capote to, you know, Hemingway and just Carson McCullers, and he's constantly, you know, surrounded by these great artists of that time, and yeah, and not just people working in film, you know, artists, painters, and literary figures, and he had all these people visiting him or he was visiting them, and just you get kind of envious because you think, wow, such people don't, you know, such people don't exist anymore, and 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 just, yeah, just the way he describes these people, kind of like, you know, very succinct, very, he never overindulges, you know, but the way he paints people is very very interesting, and it's always done respectfully. That's really yeah, what I noticed. The only thing I didn't like about the book was that, you know, he had a passion for hunting, and he writes quite a bit about, I mean, he writes about all his passions, but one of them happens to be hunting, and that's just something, first of all, I have no interest in, and I'm just not really a supporter of hunting. I have no problem with people who go out and hunt for food, that's fine, you know, or people who, you know, I come from the mountains, you know, I grew up around farms, so, you know, I have an understanding of, you know, I have a tolerance for people killing animals to eat them, you know, that's fine with me, you know, but I don't have I don't have really much understanding for people killing animals just, you know, just for you know, for a trophy. I just think that that's unnecessary, and you know, that's just ego. I mean, what's the point? Like, I don't know, but, you know, I guess that's a little bit also something, you know, that they used to do back then, maybe a little more. I mean, today's people still do it, but I guess it was a manly thing to do back then, but I don't really find it that manly, and he doesn't strike me as a guy who, you know, who, yeah, who needed to prove his masculinity. But he had this thing of he wants to kill a tiger, and, you know, if eventually it finally happened, When he writes about hunting in Africa, because the first day when he, the first day when he was in Africa to make the African Queen, when he was supposed to start shooting that day, he just happened to, somebody told him it's a good day for a hunt, so he went hunting, and everybody's waiting for him, which is kind of funny. But he wasn't a good hunter actually. But yeah, in Africa was kind of interesting. But then he writes about, because he lived in Ireland for a long time, and there when he was in Ireland, there that chapter when he writes about Ireland a lot, he also writes about fox hunting, and just writes about how how that whole thing is set up, and what it means, and blah blah blah. That whole Ireland hunting, fox hunting stuff wasn't interesting to me. And yeah, just generally the whole hunting stuff, but that just happened to be his passion. But then on the other hand, he was this great animal lover, and he writes a lot about animals and all the animals he has, and there's an entire chapter devoted to his love for animals, and you're thinking, what, I mean, can't really put these two together. You either love animals or you kill them. like kind of at one point he shoots a deer, and then later on he has two pet deers at his home. So I'm thinking, well, that just doesn't really make sense to me. That's the only thing I didn't like, the hunting stuff. And that's really the only thing. Everything else was just fascinating and clearly coming from an absolutely brilliant man, and he covered so much ground, and you get such a clear idea of him as a person, and yet he never really truly shares any innermost feelings or anything like that. It's written, and it's also his humor. His humor, you often laugh when you read the book, by just the way he expresses things, but you never get a feeling, oh, somebody was trying to make you laugh, or somebody was trying to write an entertaining book at all. It feels very natural, the whole thing. It feels very unforced, like yeah, really really pleasant. Nobody, you never feel like this guy is trying to impress you, or yeah, trying to, I don't know, trying to manipulate you in a way that you think, he's a great guy or anything. But he's also honest about, he's very honest, I feel. He's also honest about, he's not afraid to say, I made this movie and I thought it was really good, and then people maybe didn't agree. And he has no problem saying, I think this is one of my favorite films. I think this was a really good film. And then he also says, I don't like this film that I made there, and he has, he seems very he has no problem saying when he's proud of something, but he also has no problem saying when he thinks something was shit, So yeah, I'm definitely going to read more on him. I don't feel like he's much more fascinating to me now, even more, of course. And I guess I'm going to look at his movies very differently, I mean, I don't know how many Huston films I've seen up to now. Maybe around 10, or maybe a little more. I don't know. But, he writes about almost every film I think he made. So I'm looking forward to watching probably all his films, and now I have the background information on these things. So he writes about filmmaking too, and in the end he kind of writes about filmmaking, and the way he writes it is very beautifully done. Kind of like, he doesn't say, here, I'm going to give you some advice if you're a wannabe filmmaker. He kind of writes about certain things you have to keep in mind when you're making a movie, but he writes it in a way kind of like as if he's writing about his own experience, but at the same time it feels kind of like you can almost take it as advice. It's just very, very, very nicely written. I really love that book, and I can absolutely recommend it. So that was all.